My name is Warren Mercer, and I am 38 years old. 3 weeks before Christmas, I was standing in a hospice hallway in my scrubs when my phone buzzed with a text from my sister, Dana. "You're not welcome at Christmas. It's only for parents now." My family had voted me out like an unwanted town ordinance, and nobody even bothered to give me a phone call. I read it twice, slid the phone into my pocket, and finished my shift, because that is what nurses do. Then I drove home, sat at my kitchen table, and smiled with a coldness that would have terrified my sister had she seen it. I didn't beg, and I didn't argue. Instead, I opened my laptop and booked a luxury balcony suite on a Caribbean cruise sailing straight through Christmas Day. The cruise, however, isn't the core story. What my family attempted behind my back, and what they did once those holiday photos went up, is the part that still makes my hands go still. I've been a hospice nurse in Marion, Ohio for 14 years. When someone's mother is dying at 2:00 a.m., I'm the one who sits in kitchens that smell of stale coffee and fear to guide them through the final hours. I'm good at it not because I'm soft, but because I am steady. That November, I spent 3 afternoons a week with an 81-year-old retired math teacher named Ruth Hastert, a woman with a tongue like a paring knife, no children, and a bookshelf organized by old grudges. The first week she looked at me and said, "You have caretaker posture, shoulders like a coat hanger everybody uses." I liked her immediately. One afternoon, she asked who took care of me at Christmas. I fluffed her pillow and changed the subject. She let it go then, but weeks later, Ruth would say the exact sentence that saved my life. To understand what they took from me, you have to see what I had been handing them for years. My mother, Margaret, is 67 and widowed. My older brother, Grant, is an insurance engineer married to Brooke, who runs their household like a military operation with their 2 kids, Ella and Sam. My younger sister, Dana, has 3 children, Ava, Cole, and little June, who calls me Uncle Warren. Then there is the lake house on Catawba Island, a cottage built by my late father on Lake Erie where every Christmas of my life was spent. I was the one who kept it running. I put up the tree, baked the ham, and bought the stocking gifts marked from Santa so Dana could sleep in. When Mom's knees began failing, I drove her north with the good tablecloth folded on my lap. Last year's holiday card featured all 5 grandkids on that porch with the words, "The Mercer family." I wasn't in the picture, nor was anyone else who hadn't reproduced. I convinced myself it was sweet, but family evictions don't start with a text. They start with a holiday card everyone calls adorable. At 29, I married a wonderful woman named Lily Brooks. Between ages 31 and 34, we went through 3 exhausting rounds of IVF. 3 Decembers in a row, I sat in clinic parking lots listening to doctors tell us it hadn't worked. The marriage didn't survive the heartbreak. We didn't cheat. We just ran out of language. What remained was a $9,400 savings account labeled "Someday" that sat like a nursery with the lights off. I metabolized my grief into chores. I became the family fixer, handling every school pickup Dana missed, reviewing Mom's medical forms, and managing every holiday detail. If I couldn't give the family children, I would pay my dues through service. There was one more payment I'd been quietly making for 6 years that nobody in that group chat knew about. A detail that made what happened next almost funny. On Wednesday, December 3rd, while charting in the hospital hallway, the group chat Mercer Christmas lit up. Dana had sent a long, polished message that had clearly been drafted in advance. The message claimed that the lake house felt chaotic last year, that the kids' magic had to come first, and that after talking it over, they decided to try something new. Then came the sentence I'll remember on my deathbed. "Christmas at the lake house is just for the parents and kids this year." She added a heart followed by, "You understand, right? You're the cool uncle. We'll do lunch in January." Lunch in January. After 35 Christmases at that house, I'd been rescheduled like a dental appointment. In the hospital hallway, I watched the reactions roll in. Grant gave it a thumbs up. Brooke posted a gif of Santa clapping. My mother, whose porch lights I hang every November and whose medication list sits in my wallet, said nothing. Silence in my family is a vote. I drafted 4 replies, deleting each one until nothing was left, then returned to checking a stranger's morphine pump. The next evening, I did something embarrassing. I negotiated. I called Dana and found myself bidding for a folding chair. I offered to cook dinner and leave before it was served, or stay at a motel in Port Clinton and just slip in Christmas morning to watch the kids open their stockings. The stockings I fill. Dana remained sweet, which is how she wins. "It's not personal. she said in the voice she uses on her youngest child. Extra adults hovering just confuses the kids' magic. Honestly, we all talked about it and everyone agreed it's healthier. I went still. Everyone agreed. When did everyone agree, Dana? There was that exact pause a nurse hears right before a family member lies about how a fall happened. It came up organically, she claimed. In my family, nothing comes up organically except cancer. I said good night and hung up. Somewhere, a meeting had taken place about me. I just couldn't see the room yet. On Saturday, I drove to my mother's house with a casserole. Mom was at the counter addressing Christmas cards featuring the grandkids on the lake house porch again, avoiding my eyes. "Don't make waves, honey," she said before I even took off my coat. "Dana's under so much pressure, it's just one Christmas." I asked quietly if she'd been in the room when the new rule was invented. She straightened the cards into a stack. "It's what's best for the children." Watching her line up those envelopes for her church friends, I realized my exile wasn't about hovering uncles. It was about social status in a circle where a man's worth is measured in grandchildren. A divorced son without a stroller didn't fit on the card. On my way out, my eye caught her open mail on the counter, a bank statement with a line item I knew better than my own pulse. 6 years ago, after my father died of a heart attack, Mom showed me a folder. Dad had taken a home equity loan against the lake house for repairs and to quietly help a relative. With his pension gone, the house was months away from foreclosure. She cried and begged me for help and secrecy, wanting to protect my father's memory from Grant and Dana. I was 32, grieving my failed fertility treatments, and had a hole in my chest the exact size of being needed. I said yes, though my nurse habits made me write down the terms and have her sign a simple paper. I set up auto pay, loan, taxes, and insurance. 72 payments and counting, over $40,000 out of my nurse's salary in total secrecy, while Grant believed the house was free and clear and Dana planned her holiday menus. So when my sister declared that Christmas at the lake house was only for parents, the math was simple. I was banned from the only house in the family whose bills I was paying. 9 days after the initial text, my 12-year-old niece, Ella, video called me to show off her science fair volcano. Mid-eruption, she casually asked if I had really told Grandma that Christmas was dumb now, revealing that her mom had been talking about my absence since Halloween. She let slip that they had a whole separate chat called Christmas planning, one I wasn't in. After hanging up, I sat in silence and did the math. It was December 12th, all through November, while I hung my mother's porch lights, drove her to her cardiology appointments, and picked up Dana's kids on long Tuesdays. There was a room with all of them deciding I was clutter. My mother had known for 6 weeks and said nothing. You can survive being wounded by your family. What buckles your knees is learning the wound was scheduled on a calendar. That night at work, Ruth took one look at me and told me to sit. For once, I told a patient the truth about my own life. Ruth listened like a professor grading an exam, then shared her own history. 50 years of teaching, funding her extended family's needs, and hosting holidays for 30 years, only to end up in a room where almost no one visited once she was no longer useful. "I spent my whole life buying my seat at their table," Ruth told me quietly. "Turns out I was only ever renting. Don't wait until this bed to learn arithmetic, Warren. You're doing it for people who round you down." I drove home at midnight with something enormous shifting inside me. At my kitchen table, I opened my laptop. I wasn't writing a speech. I was booking a trip. I found a last-minute cancellation for a 7-night Eastern Caribbean cruise leaving Fort Lauderdale on December 23rd in a balcony suite. The total came to just under $5,000. I logged into my savings account and transferred the funds from the $9,400 balance labeled "Someday," the money that had sat untouched since my divorce, waiting for a child that never came. I paid in full and renamed the account, Now. 5 days before I flew out, I sent a brief 2-line message to the family group thread. "Confirmed. I'll be away for the holidays. Enjoy the lake house." Dana replied in under a minute asking where, while Brooke sent a message questioning if everything was okay. Grant sent nothing. Then my mother called. She didn't ask if I was hurt or where I was going. Instead, I heard her straightening her church Christmas cards on the counter as she said, "People will ask where you are, honey. What am I supposed to tell them?" There it was, the whole engine of my family summarized in a single sentence, not concern for her son's well-being, but worry over her own image. I stared out my apartment window at the glowing plastic snowman in the cold parking lot. "Tell them the truth, Mom." I said into the phone. Tell them I wasn't invited. A long silence stretched across the line before she replied. That's not fair, Warren. Nobody said you weren't. She stopped herself because we both knew the next word was welcome, and neither of us wanted to say it out loud. I hung up and finished packing. They wanted to control where I sat. Now they were about to find out where I was along with everyone else in town. Preparing for a full week off for the first time in 14 years felt surreal. My supervisor read the leave request dates twice, asking if I was having surgery. I bought reef-safe sunscreen, a book I'd meant to read for 6 years, and a wide-brimmed straw hat. Handing off my patients, the daughter of one patient gave me a tearful hug and said, "Good for you, go." A stranger's daughter managed to offer the grace my own mother couldn't find. Ruth reviewed my itinerary, checked the ship's tonnage like a professor grading a thesis, and pronounced the plan adequate, which, coming from Ruth, was a standing ovation. "Send me a postcard from your actual life," she urged with a rare laugh. Back home, packing hit a sudden snag on my dresser top. Sitting beside my car keys was a heavy brass key worn smooth at the shoulder. Stamped with a crooked letter, my father had cut that key at his workbench when I was 16, pressing it into my palm on the lake house porch and telling me, "So you can always let yourself in? No knocking, no calling ahead." For 22 years, I had carried that key through my marriage, my failed fertility treatments, my divorce, and my dad's funeral. Now, 38 years old and banned from the door it unlocked, I tried to pry it off my key ring, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. It felt like unhooking a rib. Instead, I dropped the entire ring into my carry-on bag. That key still had a job to do, even if I didn't know it yet. On December 23rd, I landed in Fort Lauderdale to 81-degree heat that felt like forgiveness. Boarding the luxury ship, a white-gloved attendant addressed me respectfully as Mr. Mercer. My suite featured a private balcony overlooking the endless ocean, complete with champagne on ice and a card reading, "Welcome aboard. We're glad you're here." Standing in my cardigan, I read the card twice and had to sit down as the quiet validation washed over me. As we set sail at 4 o'clock, I stood at the railing watching the Florida coastline shrink to a smudge. Reaching into my bag, my thumb instinctively rubbed the crooked M on the brass key. I snapped a single photo of the golden light over the open water and my hand on the railing. I didn't post it immediately. I wasn't hiding, I was deciding. Christmas Eve on the ocean was bittersweet. The ship was decked in garlands, a choir sang carols in the atrium, and soap bubble snow drifted past the decks. I was 36 hours away from realizing just how big a storm my silent departure was about to cause. I stood at the atrium railing in a new linen shirt with a glass of wine I wasn't drinking, watching families in matching pajamas and fathers carrying sleeping toddlers like sacks of sugar. For about 90 seconds, my composure wobbled. Then a voice beside me said, "First holiday alone, you've got the look." It was Nadia, a high-powered corporate lawyer from Atlanta, divorced 18 months and sitting at the solo traveler's table by choice. "My ex kept the in-laws," she deadpanned. "Best settlement I ever negotiated." I laughed out loud for the first time in weeks. We closed down the late seating alongside two widows from Michigan and a retired tugboat captain who had cruised alone every Christmas for 9 years, calling it his annual custody of himself. Nobody at that table asked why I wasn't with my family. They just asked what I was reading. At midnight on Christmas Eve, standing on my warm balcony, I checked my phone out of pure muscle memory. I had full Wi-Fi signal, but from my mother, my brother, and my sister, there was absolute silence, not a single message. That silence, intended to punish me, only made the next morning effortless. Christmas morning brought a brilliant blue sea. Nadia met me on the top deck with mimosas, took my phone and said, "Stand at the rail. You're going to want to remember being this free." She took photos of me laughing, barefoot with a coffee cup, staring out at the golden horizon. One man, one endless skyline with nobody needing a single thing from him. Sitting with my thumb over the post button, I felt no urge for petty revenge. I deleted every sharp draft in my head and simply typed, "Merry Christmas" from someone who finally spent it exactly where he was wanted. No names, no tags, no dramatic story. I posted it to my ordinary Facebook page where my whole town lived, church members, hospital coworkers, and every Mercer with a smartphone, then put my phone face down and went to breakfast. By the time we docked in San Juan the next morning, 41 notifications were waiting. My family had found the photos, and not one message was sent to wish me a Merry Christmas. Reading them on the balcony in the Puerto Rican sun, it was a tale of two reactions. My hospital colleagues and acquaintances sent warm messages of support. "Good for you, Warren," and "You deserve every minute." Then came my family's messages, dropping in temperature with every line. Dana sent, "Wow, real classy on Christmas," followed 20 minutes later by, "You couldn't give us one holiday without making it about you." I had to read that twice. I'd been formally excluded, yet my absence was still somehow my fault. Brooke chimed in next. "I hope you're proud. Your mother sat through the Christmas Eve service explaining why her son is on a boat. You've embarrassed her in front of the entire congregation." Once again, it wasn't "we miss you" or "are you safe?" It was strictly about optics and social status. Not a single message asked a single question about my well-being. As we pulled out of San Juan that evening, my brother Grant called. As the family's designated reasonable man, his tone was pre-oiled. "Nobody's mad," he opened smoothly. "But you've made your point. Take the posts down, maybe put up a quick apology, and everyone moves on. You're making Mom look bad." "Making Mom look bad," I replied, as calm as a chart review. "Walk me through it, Grant. It's a picture of me drinking coffee and smiling. No story, no caption about anyone. Which part is the attack?" He exhaled in frustration. "You know exactly what you're doing. Everyone can see you're fine, and they all know you weren't invited, so it looks." He stopped abruptly, realizing there was no way to complete that sentence without convicting themselves. "It looks like what it is, Grant," I said softly. "If a picture of me happy embarrasses this family, the problem isn't the picture." His voice dropped, sounding tired and more honest for a fleeting moment. "Dana's getting questions, Warren. Mom's getting questions from people at church and neighbors. It's becoming a thing." 6 weeks of secret planning, a family vote, my 35 Christmases. None of that had mattered to them, but my sunburn was suddenly an issue. I told Grant good night and hung up. The phone started buzzing again immediately, but the message that truly broke my heart that week didn't come from my family. It arrived at 6 in the morning while we were docked at St. Thomas. A text from my coworker, Denise. Ruth had died peacefully in her sleep on Christmas night. No pain, sharp at dinner, gone by morning. The exact exit Ruth would have graded highest. Sitting on my balcony, I cried for Ruth, for the visitors who never came to see her, and for the version of myself that had planned to be back in time to sit with her. Then Denise sent a second message. Ruth had left an envelope for me containing an aggressively cheerful get-well card covered in daisies. Inside, in her wobbly teacher's cursive, was a single line: "Sit down at your own table, son." I stared at those words, then looked at the brass key lying in my bag. I had told myself I brought that key out of habit, but holding Ruth's note, I finally admitted the truth. I hadn't brought the key so I could let myself back in. I brought it because a part of me was deciding whether to give it back. Meanwhile, my photos had taken on a life of their own. A friend from home had shared my deck picture into a massive online travel group for solo travelers. By the time we reached St. Martin, there were hundreds of comments from men and women who had been pushed out by their own families. Reading them, I realized my family's betrayal wasn't a unique malfunction. It was a pattern. That night Dana called, and for the first time I heard my sister's raw, unfiltered voice. She was crying not in anger but in envy. "You don't get it," she sobbed. "You post one photo and the whole world claps for you. I haven't slept a full night in 8 years. Being their dad is the only thing I have, while you get to be everything else." For a brief second I truly saw her. Then she pulled the wall right back up. "So take the posts down, please. You've made your point." I gave my family the answer I had never plainly stated in 38 years. No. My refusal hit my family like a stone through glass. Within hours, I was added to a new, formal group chat. A bloodless message drafted by Brooke and edited by Grant laid out their terms. Delete the posts, apologize to Dana for the spectacle, and apologize to Mom in person before the church congregation. If I refused, they threatened to reconsider my involvement in family matters going forward, including Mom's affairs. Translating that corporate family speak into plain English, they were threatening to fire me from managing Mom's medications, doctor appointments, and daily care, the unpaid job none of them had ever offered to do. They thought my usefulness was their leverage, completely blind to what they were asking me to carry. Underneath the ultimatum was a final line from my mother. "Please, Warren, just come home." I didn't answer them. Instead, past midnight on the dark ocean, I sat with two objects in front of me. One, my phone, open to the banking app where the auto pay was set to send $600 on the first of the month for the lake house loan, taxes, and insurance. The machine keeping the lights on at a house where I was no longer welcome. Two, the brass key, catching the deck lights. A key cut 22 years ago by a father who truly believed his son would always be able to let himself in. They thought they were taking something from me, having no idea what I was about to set down. I sat between those two objects, my phone with the pending $600 payment and my father's brass key, thinking about Ruth's sharp logic. Renting a chair that vanishes the moment you can't pay isn't family, it's a transaction. If I kept paying, I was just funding a life I was banned from and calling it love. I fell asleep on the balcony with the key clutched in my fist. At 6 the next morning, my phone rang. It was Grant, speaking with the grim satisfaction of a man serving a warrant. "Mom fell. She slipped on the icy back steps last night. This is what happens, Warren, when you abandon this family." My nursing instincts immediately kicked in. "Is she conscious? Did she hit her head? Who's with her?" Grant faltered. He wasn't prepared for clinical triage. He admitted she was conscious with no head injury and that Carol from next door had driven her to the clinic. I hung up and called my mother directly. She had a bad wrist sprain, a splint, and was already home eating breakfast prepared by Carol. I spent 20 minutes organizing real care, setting up a meal train with neighbors, scheduling her follow-up doctor's appointment, and committing to my regular daily 8:00 a.m. check-in call. Then Grant's next text landed, converting the fall into emotional currency. "Fly home today, delete everything, apologize to Dana. Do that and Mom says you're welcome at New Year's, all of it forgotten. This is your last chance to be part of this family." For 40 minutes, 38 years of ingrained reflex took over. I actually looked up flights from St. Martin to Miami to Columbus. Part of me wanted that seat at the table so badly my hands ached. All I had to do was fly home, resume payments, delete the photos, apologize, and keep shrinking. Then one word in his text stopped me cold: forgotten. They weren't offering to welcome me back. They were offering to erase the only time I had stood up for myself. The price of readmission was the destruction of my own self-respect. I met Nadia at the deck coffee bar and laid it out. She listened, stirred her espresso, and asked two pointed questions. "If this were a patient's family, what would you call that message?" "Leverage," I answered instantly. "And what do you tell families who use leverage on caregivers?" I heard myself utter a line I had told 100 patients over the years. "Love doesn't invoice." The words hung in the air. For years, I had let my family bill me for a sense of belonging. But the house my father's key belonged to had stopped being a home a long time ago. Nadia raised her cup slightly. "There he is," she said softly. I walked back to my suite, closed the door, and executed 3 calm, methodical actions. First, I texted Grant. No speeches, no anger. I informed him that Mom's actual medical needs were fully managed, that I would continue my daily check-in calls, but that the photos were staying up. "Dana said Christmas is only for parents now," I wrote in my final text to Grant. "Okay, then I'm only for me now." Beneath it, I added a single line for my mother. "The first of the month arrangement ends today." She knew exactly what that meant. Next, I dialed the bank number on the back of my card. Speaking to a customer service representative, I canceled the auto pay effective immediately. The lake house loan, the property taxes, and the insurance, 72 consecutive payments over 6 years totaling more than $40,000, were ended in under 9 minutes from a deck chair in the Caribbean. When the representative asked if he could help with anything else, I replied, "You have no idea," and he laughed politely before closing the file. Third, I sat down with real pen and paper to write a private letter to my mother, no copies, no group threads. I laid out the whole truth of the last 6 years, the secret folder, my father's memory, and the monthly payments. I told her I didn't want a single dollar back, nor would I utter a word to her church friends, but the dynamic had permanently shifted. "I will always show up for you as your son. I am done showing up as your staff." I folded the letter and set my father's brass key on top. He had cut that key so I could always let myself in. I was finally doing just that, just not into that house. Ending that auto pay meant the lake house was dying. Neither Grant nor Dana could carry $600 a month. The porch my dad built with his own hands and the dock where he taught me to skip stones would eventually be sold to strangers. In saving myself, I was signing away the last place on earth that still held his memory. Both truths existed at once, and I let them be. Standing at the ship's railing with the bank confirmation glowing on my phone, I said aloud to the ocean, "The lease is up." I turned my phone completely off, slipped on my evening clothes, and ate every bite of dessert at the solo traveler's table alongside Nadia and the captain. One final text had slipped through right before my screen went dark. It was from my mother. "Warren, please, not the house." 6 years of pretending the house paid for itself, and there it was, the truth written in her own hand. When I powered my phone back on days later after docking in Fort Lauderdale, the family group chat had dissolved from outrage into a sputtering silence once my mother had to explain my financial burden to them. Grant called me, his voice sounding 15 years old. "Why didn't you ever tell us?" "Because she asked me not to," I said softly. "And because I thought paying quietly was what love looked like. We were both wrong." Dana sent a long, rambling text at 2:00 a.m. containing the line, "I swear I didn't know about the money." I believed her. I wrote back briefly, making it clear I owed no apologies and wanted none. My door was open to anyone who came as my family, but closed to anyone holding an invoice. At a post office in Fort Lauderdale, I bought a padded envelope, enclosed the letter and the brass key, and mailed it to Ohio. When the postal clerk asked if the contents were fragile, I replied, "Very." The fallout that winter was real and messy. The lake house went up for sale in March. Aunt Susan stopped speaking to me, claiming I put money over blood. 2 cousins sent quiet, private messages saying, "You did what the rest of us only talk about." The church gossips buzzed for a few weeks before moving on to a fresh local scandal. Dana never formally apologized. Instead, she began sending photos of her kids again in late January, her subtle way of offering a truce. I answered every picture warmly, establishing a peaceful border between us. Neighbor Carol told me my mother sat with my envelope at her kitchen table for a long time the day it arrived. When she finally called me weeks later, her voice was different, and the brass key was never mentioned again. My mother kept that brass key, and wait till you hear why. On a gray Sunday in late February, somebody knocked on my apartment door. I opened it to find my mother holding the old Royal Dance cookie tin she'd used since before I was born. She had driven 10 minutes to get to me, a massive voyage for her in winter. Standing in my small kitchen, a place she had never once visited in the 4 years I'd lived there, she looked small, brave, and terrified. She didn't apologize because men and women of her generation were never taught those words. Instead, she turned the tin in her hands and said softly, "Your father gave you that key so you could always let yourself in. I've been keeping it in my coat pocket to remind me it was never the house that needed to stay open. It was me. I forgot the house was never the point." Then, like a guest in her own son's home, she timidly asked if she could stay for supper. We ate scrambled eggs and cookies from the tin at my small 2-chair table. She shared a story I'd never heard about my father messing up the porch beams when he first built them, and we laughed. Neither of us mentioned Christmas at all. It wasn't a total fix. Dana stayed Dana, and the church stayed the church. But at my table that night sat a woman learning at 67 to show up without needing a seating chart. People can surprise you. This Christmas, exactly 1 year after a cold text message tried to discard me, my apartment was overflowing. We pushed 2 tables together beneath a tablecloth my father's mother had embroidered. Around it sat Denise and 2 hospice co-workers between shifts, Carol with a holiday ham and 2 friends from the solo travelers group, one of whom had spent last Christmas crying alone in her car, now telling the story out loud and laughing. The tugboat captain even sent a card from Cozumel. We deliberately left 1 chair set with a full place setting, a house rule for whoever might need a place to sit next year. At 6 o'clock, the doorbell rang. It was my mother holding the blue cookie tin with my little niece June on her hip. Dana had dropped them both off and waved warmly from the car before driving away, a small act of peace I decided to cherish. My mother looked down the length of my crowded, mismatched, glorious table and asked where I wanted her. Anywhere, I replied. At my table, there is no exclusion. If you're here, you're family. We lit the candles, someone's work pager went off, and we all laughed. In March, I'm sailing again, 5 nights on a western route, booked on my own terms. Not to prove anything, but simply because the ocean and I have a standing appointment. If you take one thing from my story, remember this. A seat you have to keep paying for was never truly yours. The only table that belongs to you is the one where love doesn't come with an invoice.